My name is Don Price from Atlassian, and I'm Atlassian's word futurist. But at Experts Unleashed, I want to do something different with you. I want to bring experts from their field to you. Experts that aren't going to talk about thought leadership or theory, but they're going to bring their lived experience, their pragmatic insights, and their stories to help you unleash your potential. So the format of this show is incredibly simple. It's all based on three things. Every single session we do with an expert and Experts Unleashed, we're going to have three chapters, three core things that they are famous for, where we go through the theory, we go through the practice, and we get them to share one insight that you can try. So listen in for the three chapters. Hello and welcome to another episode of Experts Unleashed, the show that takes traditional thought leadership, pops it out the window because there's no time for it in 2025. And instead, we bring you experts in their field, experts with lived experience, insights, pragmatic ideas to help you be a better leader, a better parent, a better whatever you want to be. Today is no exception. We have someone who I think is going to really dial up your communication game to number 11, wherever you're at. It's going to hit 11, and it's 11 out of 10 for those that are concerned. Joining me today is a man who breathes and lives effective communication. We'll tell you his name in a second, but if you've ever frozen mid-sentence during a presentation, you've rambled your way through a pitch, you've wished words had more oomph and more pizzazz and more connection and more memory, or any of those things, today's guest is the man who can rescue you from the jaws of awkwardness. And I think we've all experienced that, right? Whether you're a seasoned expert at this or someone new to the game. This guy is a lecturer at Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he teaches strategic communication and spontaneous speaking. I think he might be able to help me do a little bit less spontaneous speaking, hopefully. He's also the author of a best-selling book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter. Just think about that. Think Faster, Talk Smarter. I think, again, we can all do with an ounce of that. And a host of a chart-topping podcast by the same name. He also sort of coaches, and we speak about this before the show, execs from Fortune 500 all the way to people in startups, scale-ups, any business of any type, helping them find communication with confidence and clarity. In a time of AI, noise, and overwhelming content, I can't think of a better guest to have on Experts Unleashed than the wonderful Matt Abrahams. Matt, welcome to the show.
Dominic, so happy to be here with you. And anybody who starts with a Spinal Tap reference, you are right on point.
I'm just showing my age. Well, with
believe
trees,
me.
With trees, you cut them in half to see how old they are. But with me, it's just musical references. It's all good. Matt, we always start a show with an exercise called My User Manual. We run it at Atlassian all the time. The idea that when you buy a TV, it comes with a user manual. You hire a human, no user manual, and inadvertently we fill in the gaps. So instead of filling in the gaps, we like to do an exercise of how do you work? I know we sent you the user manual before the show. No surprise to anyone, given this guy's an expert in communication. What did he pick on the user manual?
Let me think. I think it was communication.
So talk to us, if we were working together on a regular basis, Matt, what are the best and the worst ways to communicate with you?
Well, let me take a step back. I love this idea of user manuals. And in my class on strategic communication, there's a day where I bring in a Lego manual and an IKEA manual. And I just put them up, I project them on the screen, and I say nothing except to my students, discuss. And it is an amazing discussion because, as you know, and many of your listeners probably know, Lego manuals have no words. And IKEA has lots of words, often not in English, and can all be quite complex. So this notion of how do you think about communication down to the instructions for how you move things really serves as a crucible for learning how to be better communicators. So first and foremost, the one of the best things you can do is you really have to think about who your audience is and tailor your message to your audience. When I wrote my latest book, I interviewed the guy who's in charge of all Lego manuals. And he told me that for over a year before a Lego employee can write a manual, they have to go out and study how people use Legos at different ages and different abilities. So knowing your audience makes a big, big difference. And so that's definitely one of the first things we need to be thinking about. And one of the things that we need to avoid is saying way too much. Concision is really important. Being concise, and a mistake many people make is building the clock instead of just telling the time. So those are extremes. Something to do well is know your audience.
Yeah.
Something to avoid is going on and on too long.
As you've gone through your growth and experience and journey, you're a parent, right? You're a lecturer, you're in business, you're coaching, you're doing a huge amount of stuff. What have you learned about your communication style?
Mm. Yeah, so I have found that I am somebody who really once I get connected to the person or the audience that I'm speaking to or writing for, I hit my groove. So I have developed over time lots of ways to establish connection either as I start or even before I start. It's really interesting. I think one of the most underutilized connecting tools is a calendar invite. There's so much you can do in a calendar invite to connect and set expectations in everything from what you name your meeting to the first action you ask people. So personally, what I have learned is if I can connect, then it really helps me. Like you and I, before we ever started, we started
Yeah.
talking about our kids. And as
Yeah.
soon as that did, I felt like I had a connection and I feel so much more at ease communicating with
Yeah.
you.
It's funny you mention that because if I think about communication style, that's probably on the negative for me as a trigger, as in if someone's going to spend my time, the precious resource I have, and not give me any context, that sends me down the wrong spiral, right? So it's amazing how that can either be a -1 or a +1. For me, if they don't do it, I'm immediately on the back foot because I'm like, you're spending my time, but I don't think you've done the due diligence to spend it fairly or wisely or with consideration.
Yeah, I like that way of perceiving it. Yeah, but
Yeah.
you have to make sure. I mean, first impressions really matter, and those
Mm.
impressions start way before you get on the Zoom or walk into
Yeah,
the
yeah,
room,
yes,
and
yeah,
and managing that and helping people understand that there's value in the time you are spending in this interaction.
yeah.
And doing that up front through the calendar invite or as soon as you get started really makes a big difference.
So give us an insight, Matt. What are the worst ways to communicate with you? What are the ways where even if it's by accident, good intention, that just sends you in the wrong direction?
So I have a colleague, his name is Huggy Rao, awesome
We both
guy.
know
He
Huggy. We
likes
know both know Huggy very
Yeah, you
well.
know Huggy, you know Bob, yes. One of the things that you talked about on your episode with Huggy was this notion of jargon monoxide. And one of the ways to really turn me off in any communication is to start using acronyms, jargon,
Yeah.
technical speak that I don't understand. I need you to talk like a human to me,
Mm.
and then we can connect and then we can move forward. But a lot of people, either out of habit or because they want to show, hey, I know so much, they
Yeah,
start
it's
with very
so
deep
easy.
technical speak, and that gets in the way. So jargon monoxide, as Huggy says, suffocates communication, and that's one of the biggest ways to turn me off.
Yeah, it's funny. I associated it previously with age, right? Because I think in my 20s and 30s, showing up was part of my career mojo, right? It's like, look how much I know, look how smart I am. And even though I didn't know it, I was pretending it was the theater, the fake it till you make it. And then I kind of hit mid 40s. I'm like, I don't care for that stuff anymore. So sod that. But now my intolerance for that has grown because of it. 'Cause I'm like, now I've come out of that world. I'm like, can we just like talk straight? And for me, it's is the language accessible? When someone talks in jargon, I'm like, now you're making me do the gymnastics and the work to Google that whilst you're talking to interpret that. That's just not cool. Like it doesn't.
I 100% agree, and I love that you use the word accessible because that's the
Mm,
word I use. It's not about dumbing things down or oversimplifying. That actually gets you in trouble. But there are a whole slew of techniques that you can use to help make content accessible. You can use analogies and comparisons. You can deconstruct. You can backward map. There are a whole bunch of ways to help make content accessible. And when you do that, there's research that says you actually bolster your credibility, build trust, and make the person wanna talk to you more, which are all
yes.
desirable outcomes.
It's it's an absolute no-brainer when you bring yeah, yeah, I now understand why you wrote a book on this stuff, 'cause it's like, it's so logical when you think about it like
Yeah,
that, and then you're like, "Okay," then I immediately thought, "How many times do I forget those steps?" Like, again,
that's
not
right.
malicious, it's not a bad thing, but how many times have I stayed in my world, my lingo, my
Right.
environment, and conveyed something that I understand, the other person's like, "Dude, like, no clue what you're talking about there."
That's right, that's right, and if you can't establish that connection and that trust, then you're working against yourself. You're walking
Yeah.
into the wind.
I had a coach years ago that was teaching me about message checking. She's like, it doesn't matter what you say, just ask the person to say it back to you and just listen for the nuances. And have they heard what you meant or have they heard something completely differently? And again, that was a practice where I'm like, wow, I'm confident in what I said, but what you've heard is completely different. And so the instruction you think you've got is these three things. And I'm like, no, it's these three, and they're very, very different three.
So Very wise coach that you had. I mean, what was being discussed there is the F word of communication, and it's not the naughty word. It's fidelity, it's accuracy and clarity. If all we do is broadcast information and define that as success in communication, that's a problem. It's how is it received? And then you have to tailor the message to increase the likelihood that fidelity goes up. So that checking that you're talking about, the structuring of messages, the packaging of messages, all of that is critical. The goal is not just that you get it out there, it's the person receives it, and in many cases, can then turn around and reliably repeat it to others.
Yes. Yeah. I want to come back to that because I have a sense that post-pandemic, a lot of businesses and leaders got very broadcasty, and to
Yes.
justify that, they started measuring reach, not
Right.
activation, right? And I'm like, "Oh, you've justified the means by measuring how many people you touched, not the impact you had on those people." We'll come back to that one. That's a
Yes.
chapter itself. And the 3 chapters you've chosen, I'm desperate to get into. These are all fascinating. One, you call "Tell the Time, Don't Build the Clock." So we'll get onto that as chapter number 1. Number 2, "Structure Sets You Free." This is a fascinating one for me. I constantly pendulum swing between liking structure and hating it, and realizing that there's actually the gray in the middle. Like, a little bit of guidance goes a long way, but I'm always fighting that one. And "Prepare to be spontaneous." And I love the almost sort of contradiction there, right? And I
Yes.
talk to people like themselves, like, you can prepare for eventualities. You can prepare for randomness, right? You can be in the zone. I do it a lot with my workshops. I'm like, I can't predict what's going to happen, but I can be prepared when someone takes us on a curveball, right? Or challenge, like, I can be ready for that. So let's start with chapter 1, Matt. The idea of "Tell the time, don't build the clock." Enlighten us there.
Yeah, so that's a saying that my mother has been telling me my whole life. The notion is that concision is critical, being concise and clear. I believe attention is the most precious commodity we have in the world today. Getting someone's attention takes effort, and sustaining that attention is even harder. And I call sustained attention engagement. And the best way to engage somebody is to just give them what they need, not a lot more. So there are really 3 techniques I rely on to help make sure that I am concise and clear. First, you have to make sure that you understand what's important for your audience. What's important for us is less important than what's important for them, which means we have to do reconnaissance, reflection, and research on our audience. Now, some of us communicate with audiences that we know, and then we have a leg up because we know what's important to them, but others of us don't. So we have to research them, cyber stalk them, look at their LinkedIn profiles, their Substack posts, their bios on their company websites. Talk to people who know them. Figure out what's important for them. Once you understand relevance and salience, you then have to have a clear goal for yourself. I am shocked at how few people actually define a goal for their communication. How do you know if you're successful if you don't have a goal? So to me, a goal has 3 parts: information, emotion, and action. When I communicate, here's what I want you to know, here's how I want you to feel, and here's what I want you to do. So by having clear relevance, having a clear goal, and then what we'll talk about next, having a clear structure really helps you focus. Many communicators just take audiences on a journey of the discovery of what they want to say as they're saying it, and that leads you to ramble and get into the weeds. To be concise and clear, to tell the time, you have to know what's relevant, you have to have a clear goal, and I would argue you have to leverage structure. That's how you tell the time.
It's interesting, man. One of the things I've been, I do, as you know, a fair bit of public speaking. And whenever I do the briefing before the event, it's who's in the room, how are they feeling when I get there, how do you want them to feel when I leave, and it's a similar but slightly different sort of set of questions around. I need to understand their mood and their persona and what they've been through, but also let's be honest about where do you want them. Do you want them to go on a downward spiral of feeling bad to then build them up, or do you want me to give them wind in their sails, or they already feel like understanding that? Because if I guess, I'm almost always going to get that wrong. And I can walk in, deliver my keynote, my speech, my talk, walk off stage and go, something doesn't feel right because you've missed that connection with the audience. But it's funny that pre-work is often forgotten in the world of sort of business. I see people spending more time finessing slides than I
Yes.
do trying to understand who they're delivering that story to.
Amen, brother. So people think that they're making progress on their talks by fiddling with slides. You're not. The biggest value you can get is focusing on where your audience is and where you want them to be. You know, all of us as communicators suffer from the curse of knowledge and the curse of passion. We know too much about what we're talking about and we care too much about it. And because of that, we can become myopic in terms of how we communicate it. And instead, as you said, it's all about where the audience is. And then we have to meet them there and try to move them along. Fundamentally, your job in communication is like being a tour guide. And the best tour guides know you have to connect what you're saying and where you're going to what's important for the people. And then you need to move them along. And you only do that by reflecting on who
Yeah.
you're communicating to and having a clear destination in mind.
That tour guide one's a great analogy again, right? If you think about it, there's every tour guide starts by asking who's in the group, right?
Absolutely. And then
Have you
setting
been in
expectations.
before?
Yeah, and then setting expectations where you're going, where you're not. If you How would it feel, Dominic, if I came up to you and said, "Hi, I'm your tour guide, let's go." You'd be like,
Yeah,
"Whoa, where are we going? What are
yeah.
we doing? Why are we doing it? Do I have the right shoes on?" So every good tour guide sets your expectations, gets to know you, and then they tailor your journey with them. So that is the same way we have to communicate.
It's funny, we have like, an unofficial sixth value at Atlassian that we debate regularly, which is seek first to understand. And it's I always find it fascinating because I'm reminded of it when I don't do it. It's when it's like oxygen. When it's there, you take it for granted. The minute you don't do it is when you make an assumption because you don't seek first to understand. You double down on that assumption and you get to your grand moment and you're like, bugger, I should have really asked a question there and I didn't. And I've not understood and therefore I've gone down the wrong path.
That's right. You said that it's debatable. I'm curious why. I mean, to me, that is one of the things I do a lot of work with Atlassian, and one of the things that I really like is how strong your values are. You are definitely a values-driven company. I like that some of your values actually use curse words. I think that's cool. But to me, that's not debatable at all. I mean, like you said, it's like oxygen. That's a must-have in communication.
Yeah, and if you don't do it, then again, you're probably picking metrics that justify the broadcast, right? I
Right.
did the thing rather than the outcome. I moved someone to think differently.
Correct. Yeah.
So
Totally. Totally
how
agree.
do great communicators measure their impact? I'm always curious because
Right.
again, I feel like we're in a world of sort of vanity metrics that say you did a thing, right? The output measure. I stood on the stage and told the story, not the outcome measure of here's the people and I had an impact and here's how they changed. How do you help people understand that?
Yeah, so, I think it comes down to the goal you have. I have the good fortune of traveling all over the place to teach communication, and I will often ask people, "How do you know if your communication was successful?" And the number one answer I get, people say, "I got through it," as if survival is the best success metric, which is ridiculous. Instead, you should ask, "Does the audience leave knowing what I want them to know, feeling how I want them to feel, and likely to do what I want them to do?" So to me, that is the clearest measure of success, and you can assess that in lots of different ways, but it boils down to you have a goal, and then at the end, you measure your goal. Now, I'm an academic, so that's what research is all about. You have a
Yeah.
hypothesis and you test it. You have a goal and you test, and that's how you figure it out.
I love there's two things that really grabbed me in your middle sentence there. It was feels and likely, right?
Yeah.
It's both of them are about the other person. It's not
Right.
how do I feel? Yeah, I'm glad to be getting off stage, or I'm really. It's not my feeling. It's their feeling of I feel inspired or provoked or motivated, and likely is I'm probably going to try that when I get back to my desk. Right? Those two things are the measure of success. But again, to your point before about empathy, it's the other person's view, not your view of self.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So you tailor your message to motivate them, to move
Yeah.
them, and then you have to assess if you did.
How have you found? I mean, you've no offense, you've been in this field for a while, right? You're a seasoned
I
veteran.
think you're calling me old, but yes.
Wise. The word I use is
Wise.
wise.
Oh, I see, yes. I have
It's
a lot of
it's
this
not
gray
time based.
wiseness. Yes,
Not
yes.
time based. It's an accumulation of knowledge. You could have done it very quickly. Um, how have we seen this change as like technology and media and like the nature of like connectedness has changed?
Yeah, so certainly technology has affected how we communicate, but that has always been the case. I would argue that it's probably happening at a faster clip. And as people are living longer and working longer, we're seeing the impact of the variety of different types of technology on communication relative to people's experience, right? So you've got people who are my age and older saying, "Hey, just come meet with me," and you've got people who are, younger folks who are just on their phones. So technology clearly has an impact. Now, I don't think it's all negative. I do think there are severe negative impacts of technology on communication, but it is driving us to be a bit more efficient, a bit more concise. That can lead to negative impact in terms of connection and trust building. So technology has always been important to and evolve side by side with how we communicate, but we want to be multilingual. We want to be able to code switch among different ways. One of the biggest challenges I find as a father of young folks, they're in their early 20s, is the flexibility, the ability to move among different ways of communicating is not as flexible as perhaps somebody who is slightly older. So I think it's really about being flexible, multilingual, if you will. But certainly technology impacts. I mean, we all went through that with the pandemic and when we all went virtual. But certainly since then, a whole bunch of other means of communicating, and we just have to get on the same page, right? So we know the rules and how to best do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I had a realization a few years ago that whilst I have preferences in how I communicate, I shouldn't let that bias impact the audience's preference for how they consume, and that
Right.
multilingual becomes a thing. So, as an example, I've got a new starter starting next week. For her, I've written up a page, so she'll get all the
Yeah.
documents. There's a whole lot of links. I've also done her a welcome video, right?
Great.
And
Yeah.
that's because she's in the US and I'm in Australia. And in her first 2 days, there isn't an overlap time, but she gets to hear from me and see me. And there's a different
That's
amount of
lovely.
language and context in there. And we'll meet in person, or we'll meet virtually, and we're planning to meet in person, right? And it's not that any one of those is better or worse than the other. It's the combination of them, I think. Yeah.
That's right. So you're leveraging lots of different modalities
Yeah.
to really make that initial connection, and with a fresh starter, that's really important. Most people don't think about that. Most people say, "I've gotta get this message from me to you,
Yes.
and the easiest way for me to do it is whatever our default preference is,"
Yeah.
rather than saying, "What's the impact of simply sending a welcome text versus
Yeah.
making a phone call?" So we just have to take
Yeah.
that extra step, and again, it's about empathy and understanding, and then we can move forward.
Why? I'm curious. Have you got any ideas about why we don't do that more? Like, I feel like empathy comes up a lot in this
Yeah.
show with leaders of all different types and
Yeah.
backgrounds. Like, just giving ourselves, I don't know if it's like permission or whatever, to just have that millisecond of
Right.
pause.
Well, so yes, exactly. So I think there's several reasons. First and foremost, I think communication is simply operationalized empathy. I mean, communication is the way we are empathetic. But I think a lot of it is, well, one, we're very busy and we have a lot going on. So we don't take a moment to think, we just think about, I got to get the message out rather than if I spend a moment to really reflect and find the right channel and the right way of framing the message, it's actually not only going to connect me more, but it's going to save me time on the back end because I don't have to clean up the mess.
Is the
But
time
the other thing
investment.
is,
That's this nugget of going, if I do this preparation now, I
right,
save future time. If I
that's
don't,
right.
I spend future time and thrash.
Right, exactly, and we are not good at future casting in that way, but I think there's something a little more subtle and nuanced. I think to be empathetic is also to expose ourselves a little bit, because we slow down and we think about the other, we think about there's a little bit of vulnerability that comes with empathy. And I think that's great. I think that's why we connect through empathy. But to answer your question, why we don't do it, I think there's some kernel of truth in that as well. So when you put that with rushed and having so much to get out, I think it just leads us to default to just broadcast versus the slowing down and really connecting.
Yeah, it's funny as you were explaining that. It was like triggering a memory. I was at an event a couple of years ago. The closing keynote speaker, everyone was super excited to hear from. Relatively famous. They've got clips on YouTube, and I was like, wow. They hadn't done a briefing, and they hadn't attended any of the event. They arrived, hair, makeup, on stage, and they delivered like to a T their presentation, and the whole room felt a little bit dirty and cheated because you sat there going, "Oh no, the content in theory is great. It's mind-bogglingly amazing, but I can't consume it from you because you clearly haven't given two hoots about me." Like just that one step missing. completely degraded the whole experience. Now, they were beautifully arrogant enough to walk off stage and not care. So I'm not even going to try and pretend. But it's just fascinating as a consumer to go, oh, you did a
Yeah,
lot of the hard work, but missing that one step
right.
made a demonstrable difference.
Right, and that's why when I keynote and when I coach people who keynote, I say, you have to spend time connecting, not
Yeah.
just to the organizers and to the event, but you have to
Yeah.
connect to the people in the room, and
Yeah.
you can do that. It's just we don't take the time.
Yeah. And also, as you sort of mentioned before, and we'll cover this in a bit, be prepared to pivot, right? Be prepared for the fact that whatever prep you do, you're going to get a fall somewhere you never quite know what. Let's go on to chapter two, because again, this is one that I've battled a lot with. Structure sets you free, and again, I think people forget that structure is a spectrum; it's not on or off. But help us understand how, in the world of higher fidelity, clearer communication, how can structure set us free?
Yes. So structure, first let me define what I mean by structure because it's a loaded word. So to me structure is nothing more than a logical connection of ideas. Many of us when we communicate, we just itemize and list what we want to get across. And our brains are not wired for lists. We struggle with them. I mean, Dominic, how many items do you need to buy from the grocery store before you have to write it down so you don't forget? For me, it's like 3. Anything over 3, it's like I'm gonna forget. We're just not good with lists, yet that's how many people communicate. Think about the slides people create. It's just bullet points. Bullets
It's
kill.
noise
Yeah,
and
totally.
volume and stuff.
And that's overwhelming. Our brains are not wired for that. What we are wired for is a logical connection of ideas. Stories are an example of structure. Everybody listening to this knows structure. If you've ever seen a television advertisement, you've seen the structure problem, solution, benefit. Most ads talk about some issue, challenge in the world, their product or service fixes it, and then there's some benefit. That's a logical structure. It resonates. Long before we ever had PowerPoint and other things, the way we passed information through was story, folklore, legend. I mean, that's how we did it. So we're wired for that. So if you can have a structure, you make it easier on you to put the information together and you make it easier for the audience to digest. I am not saying that you have to overly architect your structure, but having a logical connection of ideas is so helpful. And our brains are wired to remember that more.
So I imagine again, as the not only the person telling the story, but as the consumer, you get a sense of flow. You're like, oh, this follows that. Like you're not having to do again mental gymnastics. You're not like you've drawn a four-dimensional diagram here that I'm struggling to follow. Which there was one I saw recently. I'm like, I've been trying to mind map what you were saying, and I'm in the fifth dimension, and I don't know if I don't know if I took a good turn somewhere along the way because it was so complex. Like it was a complex subject, but they hadn't found a way of giving that logical flow.
That's right, and when you do so, you set expectations. As a tour guide, and I was a tour guide when I was in university, I was a tour guide, and, you learn to set people's expectations up front so people know where they're going, that's really important. Structure does that. Additionally, structure connects ideas together. The place you lose people the most on a tour is when you move from one location to the next. S and so how does a good tour guide keep people together? They connect where you've been to where you're going. They motivate you to move along. If I'm using problem, solution, benefit as a structure, I can simply say, now that you understand the problem, how do we go about solving it? There's intrinsic curiosity and motivation to connect those ideas together so I don't lose you. And so the value of structure is it sets a path and it connects the ideas together. And because our brains are wired for structure, it helps us remember it more. So we are feeding the brain the way it is meant to be fed versus lists or just slide after slide after slide, none of which help.
Yeah. So if you're a leader out there, what are some other ways? I love the problem sort of solution benefits model. Are there other simple structures we could share with leaders out there to go, hey, look, if you're struggling, like, because I think the thing you're aiming for here is fidelity. You mentioned it before, right? The F word is it's not cramming more words, more visuals, more anything. It's how do you get to your value prop? How do you get to your message quicker? So, what are some of
Yeah.
the models people can use?
Let me share 2 more structures that I think are really useful. The
Mm,
first one is also pretty simple, like problem, solution, benefit, and it's simply chronological, past, present, future. How was it? How was it? How is it? How will it be? We have heard every senior leader of every major company, including Atlassian's, in the last 2 years, in some way, shape, or form, come out and use this structure relating to AI. Here's how we used to do things. Here's how we do it today. Here's how AI is going to help us in the future. That's a very logical structure. It allows you to have a through line so people see some consistency. It's a way to put mission, vision, values through a message. So that one is also very important. And then my favorite structure is three simple questions. What? So what? Now what? What is the information you're sharing? It could be your update, your product, your service, your feedback, your answer to a question. The so what is why is it important or relevant to the person you're speaking to? And then the now what is what you'd like to come next. So I'll give you two quick examples. Imagine you're doing an update. You're in an update meeting and you have to give an update. The what is your update? The so what is why it's important to the KPIs or goals of the group. And then the now what is what you're going to do next and the contingencies that are in the way. Similarly, if you asked me to give you feedback, you said, "Hey, Matt, how'd that meeting go?" I can give you feedback. I can say, "Hey, I thought the meeting went really well, except when you talked about the implementation plan. You spoke quickly and didn't give as much detail." That's the what. When you speak quickly without a lot of detail, people think you're nervous or unprepared. That's the so what. Next time, slow down and include these two bits of information. That's the now what. So by leveraging a structure or this structure with what, so what, now what, all of a sudden your communication is clearer and
Yeah.
more easily, you can remember it more easily and act on it.
I also imagine there's like a side benefit there of pace because you're not
Yeah.
having to second guess the structure. You just got one to rely on. You can calmly and logically just ask yourself, what's happening? So what next,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, any of these structures work that way. Some are easier to put into practice, but what, so what, now what is a lovely structure. I use it all the time. In fact, I don't want to get too meta on you. I explained what, so what, now what using what, so what, now what. I said what it is, why it's important, and then gave you an example. It's just a way of packaging information.
Yeah, the one I've been using with a couple of folks at Atlassian recently is the head, heart, and hands, which
Yeah,
is not
perfect.
yeah, not dissimilar, but I find again people default to one or the other. So a lot of Atlassian's very engineering, technical focused. They love the logic of the head, and they're not always as comfortable talking about how that feels. I'm like, just balance your story because you had me at the logic, but like the so what is the emotional part. Like, how did it feel? And then the hands is what next? Like turn that into action. Yeah. It has
I
that
love it.
little bit
That's
of
just
structure.
that's a very visual way, I think, of saying
Mm,
something very similar. But again, it's a structure, and there are myriad structures. Many of your listeners are probably familiar with um, the structure of comparison, contrast, conclusion, for example, or STAR: situation, task, analysis, results. These are structures that exist. I don't care what structure you use; just leverage a structure.
yeah. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It becomes less important about picking the right one because there isn't a right, perfect answer versus having one that just gives you that millisecond of breathing room to apply
That's
some
right.
logic. I imagine the benefit there of you get less verbose because you're like bang,
Mhm.
bang, bang, right?
Yeah.
It's just is there any science or rationale behind the fact that most of those are threes?
So I get this question a lot. Star is not three.
No.
I had a student once. I teach at Stanford's Business School. I had an MBA student, fascinating guy. Not only was he getting an MBA, but he was training to be a preacher. He was in seminary, and he told me after we talked about structure in class, he said, "I learned a structure for sermons." And I said, "What's the structure?" And he said, "It's me, we, thee, we, me." So you start with an issue about yourself, what it means for the congregation, what God's spirit or deity says about it, what it means for the congregation. So there's an example of five. So not all of them have to have three, but there is a symmetry, a sense of connection with threes. I have not heard a compelling argument or rationale or scientific evidence to say that there's some reason for threes. It just seems to resonate. We see it not just in communication, but we see it in religion, we see it in nature. I don't know why, but threes
Yeah,
do tend to
it
fit.
manifests a lot in like, what are your top like, when we're doing retrospectives, what are the top 3 things? I'm like, by the time we're at the 4th, I don't think there's value in that, we're not gonna do it.
Yeah,
2
it's
seems
interesting.
too
Eh,
precise, like,
yeah, yeah,
or an automation.
exactly. I worked with a CEO once of a company I worked for, and he and I were talking about this, and he said, "2 seems like too few, and 4 feels like too many."
Yeah,
And
yeah,
okay, that
I'm with
feels
them.
right. I don't know
Yeah.
why, but it
I
does.
don't need any more science in that.
Yeah.
Just on that, Matt, when you're coaching leaders, and I know you did this with, brand new, fresh leaders in startup scales, whatever, all the way through to Fortune 500 execs, what are some of the challenges they're facing when you're trying to help them? Like, what helps them sort of suddenly click and go, "Hang on, the way I'm doing it now isn't working, and I need a different path?"
Yeah, so I think for a lot of folks, one, they have to get out of their own way. I at the highest level, I tell my students and the people I coach that my job is to turn habits into choices. Many people, especially leaders, have been successful in their communication and they just repeat, rinse and repeat what they've always done. But that doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. It seems to have worked, but there are other ways. So really it's getting out of your own way and being open to trying other ways, not necessarily in high stakes situations. Try them in lower stakes situations. So we get in our own way. We just have a habit of how we do things. And for many people, those habits have served well. So they just keep repeating them without being open and say, hey, maybe there's a different approach. I'll give you an example. Many people, especially leaders, are into telling people what to do. Here's what to do. Here's the next step. What if you change that into questions? That fundamentally changes the interaction. It becomes more dialogic. It becomes more connective. Should you always lead with a question? No. But I think in many circumstances where leaders in particular are used to just declaring things to be, asking a question might be a much better alternative. So that's an example of helping people get out of their own way and try something new and different. And in so doing, it opens up possibilities that they closed off because of the way that they typically do it. So I work a lot with leaders to help them first identify their habits, and then we talk about what might be some alternatives. And the example of declaration versus inquiry is a good
Yeah.
example.
Well, again, you've just touched on the facet of time, right? Which is declaration feels quick. I'm going to
Yeah.
tell you, I know it's not going to be effective. I tell you, it's done, it's over. And you're like, it's not because it didn't get heard versus the inquiry. I've got to listen to the answer. I've got to have a follow up question. I've got to invest. I've got to give a shit about the person. Like all those things that we know are the right things to do. You're like, I'm too busy. So it's
But
fascinating.
you could train yourself to break that habit. You can train somebody to say the first thing out of your mouth is to ask a question. That's something you can learn.
Oh,
And once you
100%.
do it and see the benefits, you get the positive reinforcement. So when I lecture my students, I never start with declaration. I always start by saying, today we're going to answer 3 questions. And I just give them the questions.
Yeah.
And so you can learn that. And through that learning and through the feedback loop of, oh, I'm getting deeper detail, I'm be
Yeah.
able to tailor my message. People seem to be more engaged. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, then that becomes a new habit.
Right. Because you get the value back and you follow. So to think about that, that is you need to practice it a few times. But
Yep.
really, there's an undercurrent that you've been quite subtle with there, which is you have to do it authentically. You
Mhm.
can't do it
Oh,
to
absolutely.
manipulate. You
No.
have to do it genuinely interested in the answer you're going to get. Not, I want to tell you what to do, but I've heard somewhere that asking questions is better. I'm going to ask you questions until you get to my view. It's not that.
No, no, that's true. Very true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah, but that asset of
So that
time again, just
authenticity piece
pausing.
is yeah, authenticity is critical. People feel that warmth, that openness, that
Yeah.
connection, and so you have to come from a place that has to be a genuine place. But once you do, then these techniques can really, really turbocharge your communication.
I imagine this is even more important for most of the leaders you're working with because they're working across geographies, cultures, customs, like
Yeah,
the rich
yeah,
tapestry and variety. Like
yeah.
if I communicate, born in the UK, lived in Australia for 20 years now, I have a certain style of communication. But when I go to different countries, I have to just remind myself the
Yeah.
consumer in that market is quite different. And again, that tailoring.
That's right, that's right. So culture and context weigh heavy in all communication, and so we've talked about how important it is to think about your audience, but you also have to think about the culture and the context as well, and that adds an additional layer, and whatever works for you might not translate literally and figuratively, and when I talk about culture, I don't just mean country of origin. I mean, different teams have different cultures within an organization, and you have to be sensitive to that. And it makes it multifaceted. Communication is complex when you think about it. And there are some fun foundational rules that can help you navigate that complexity, but we have to be open to it.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. I love that. Let's go on to chapter 3 because this one had me intrigued when I first read it. There's a lot in it says more about me than anything. The prepare to be spontaneous. I love this. Tell us more about what this means and how does it manifest?
Right. So it's very counterintuitive. You know, spontaneity feels like it's just free and just happens, but you can do a lot of preparation to help yourself. I always encourage people to think about athletes or jazz musicians or people who do improvisation. There is a tremendous amount of practice that goes on. You know, an athlete, I happen to be a big fan of basketball. Athletes dribble around cones, they take lots of shots, not so that they can make that exact shot or that exact move, but when you're in the game, you want to have, the training so that you can adjust and adapt. So having some preparation helps, but we don't wanna be rigid. So we wanna have structure, but we don't wanna memorize. We wanna know that we tend to do better when we are asking questions than when we are making declarations, but we don't wanna plan the questions down to
Yeah.
the word because something might
They'll never
change.
happen like that. So
That's
like your
exactly right.
basketball analogy, it's be prepared to take a shot when you've got X number of defenders against you, except they won't be there and there. They'll be somewhere. I can't tell you where, but
That's
they'll be
right.
somewhere.
So part of it is it builds confidence and confidence in our abilities and confidence in our message. And when you have confidence, you can truly be connected and in the moment. Because when we're not confident, we are in our heads judging and evaluating, which pulls us away, which makes us less responsive. So there is preparation that can be done, but you can always prepare and practice more. There are tools that can help. You know, I'm a big fan of taking classes, of Toastmasters, of improv, listening to podcasts. There are so
Improv.
many ways.
Matt, tell us about the role of improv because I've got a few people to do it in my career when I've been coaching them, and it's been a game changer for them. Like,
Yeah.
what is it about that that just takes people into a new mindset?
Yes. So I got connected to improv probably 2 decades ago, and I actually co-teach a class with a guy named Adam Tobin, who's an expert improviser. Improv, many of us have a stereotype of what improv is. Like it's being up on a stage, taking feedback from people, and then being funny. That's not what improv is about at all. Improv is a mindset. It's an approach. It's about being present. It's about connecting to the moment and doing what's needed. And when you follow improv in that way, it can be foundational, fundamentally changing, foundational in how you approach things. Because improv at the end of the day is about connection and really being present. And those are skills that help you in so many ways. Now, improv, people think of improv as just being free flow and people just do whatever they do. Improv is actually incredibly structured. It gets back to the previous point. There are rules people follow, the most famous of which is yes and. If you and I are doing an improv game or doing an improv scene, and you come onto the stage and say, "Hi, grandma" to me, I become grandma. I don't say, "No, I'm grandpa. What are you thinking?" No. So there's this notion of there's the rule that I will always accept the offer that you bring. And so by following these structures, they set up the freedom for people to actually do the things that they do. And it helps you feel psychologically safe because I know what you're going to do. You're going to accept my offer, and I know I'm going to accept your offer. So it gives us that freedom. So again, this preparation and structure sets you free. And there's actually some really good research that says people are more creative when there are these constraints on their
Yeah.
behavior. When there are no constraints, it actually can be paralyzing.
Oh, 100 I could not agree more. I mean, I do a fair bit of constraint-based innovation. I mean, it's
Yeah.
fascinating when you say to one, we've only got we actually had a card game we used to use them and someone come up with an idea, you turn a few cards, you're like, "Our competitors have the same idea, so we've only got 3 months and we've got no budget. What are you gonna do?" And like, they suddenly come up with this amazing idea and you're like, where was that? It was within you somewhere, but when you
Right.
had lots of time, you kind of filled the time and you took it easy. Now that it just created a different sense of
Yeah.
focus or urgency, some of the creativity goes through the roof.
That's exactly right. So improv is a very powerful tool. It's an on-ramp to becoming more self-aware and more connected and empathetic to other people. There are other ways of doing that,
Yeah,
but improv to me is a fun, connected, easier way than some of the others.
I couldn't agree more. Like, if I could recommend it to anyone, I would. I've never been disappointed by the results of anyone and I've done it myself as well. It's a great anchor point to go. I was in a
And it can be
prickly
fun.
position and no
Yeah.
one died. Like it was
Yeah.
a little bit awkward and a little bit weird and a little bit funny, but no one died. I survived and I feel more resilient and more capable because of it. That's only a good thing. If someone's not going to sign up for an improv class, what are some of the other accessible ways just to build that muscle around
Yeah.
being more comfortable being spontaneous?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan and proponent of Toastmasters. It's an
Yeah.
international organization. It is not expensive to join. They are all over the place. And in Toastmasters typically meet an hour every week, and half of the time they spend in what they call table topics, which are impromptu, spontaneous communication opportunities. So it gives you the reps. Another way to do that on your own is to leverage AI. So imagine I have a job interview coming up. I can go to my favorite LLM and I can say, interviewing for this role at this company, doing this type of work, ask me 3 questions that are likely, and then practice answering them, right?
Right.
So
That alone is just like a prime example of using technology for good, just to get yourself in the zone. Like I say, it's not that those questions will get asked. Don't rehearse the answers. Please don't rehearse the answers,
right.
but just get yourself in the zone like a player would before a game.
That's exactly right. And so there are myriad ways and access points to this idea, but finding it is important. I've done martial arts for decades, and the martial arts, believe it or not, are an accessibility point to being spontaneous. The lessons are a little harder, and sometimes you need to put ice on them. But the point is that you learn to be spontaneous and respond. And I'm not saying everybody should go sign up for karate lessons, but you can learn it through music, you can learn it through a sport. I mean, there are lots of ways to access this idea of being present, being responsive, and to take your time to do that because it not just helps you. It doesn't just help your communication;
Yeah.
it helps you as a human being.
I was just, as you were saying that, I'm just thinking like, I play for an over 45 soccer team, and I'm like,
Yeah,
communication and team sports, like they go hand in hand. You're like,
absolutely.
we fiddle, we do the warm up before the game because you got to be in the zone. You got to get the
Right.
feel of the touch. But also, you know that when the whistle goes, that whatever plan you decided is now out the window because the opposition didn't listen to that plan. They do not care what your plan was. They've got their own plan, and apparently they want to win as well. So like go figure out. So you've got to be able to like adapt, right? And I think there's that a good friend of mine, Andrea Clark, just wrote a book called Adapt about how we build the muscle of adaptability. I feel like that's becoming like a required superpower for a lot of leaders.
Absolutely. The ability to adapt and the ability to be comfortable, and this is trite, but to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm doing a lot of work on this notion of ambiguity. That so much of our communication is ambiguous, and we have to be able to manage those ambiguities because there is no certainty in some circumstances. And so being comfortable with ambiguity, being able to adapt and be agile are critical skills as business and life progresses.
Yeah. It'd be remiss of me not to mention the favorite topic du jour right now, AI. You just gave us a great AI use case, right?
Yeah.
If you're interviewing, right, use your favorite LLM for that. In your world of communication, have you got any sort of positivity and hope or any concerns around how
Oh,
AI might impact us?
big yes to both. So I think AI can be really useful in many ways in our communication. I have a colleague, Rachel Conrad, who says, AI is sort of like having a bunch of interns. It can generate a lot of content, but you have to check it, you have to mold it, you have to make sure it's accurate. But let me give you some use cases that my students use it for and I use it for. So, for example, in my course, I like to give lots of examples to my students. And it used to be that I would have 3 or 4 because it takes a lot of time. I can use AI now to create multiple examples. Many of my students are non-native speaking to the language I teach in. It's wonderfully helpful to help them with grammar and syntax and other options. Not that they should plagiarize and take word for word, but to see that. It's a great tool for concision. Write something and then say, "How would you get the same point across in 30% fewer words?" So there are ways that it can work to help us as long as we learn the meta lesson. So I don't just put it in and say, "Oh, okay, here's the 70% more concise." I say, "What did it do?" "Oh, I noticed it took out a lot of the complex sentences," or so we start looking and learning from it. So it becomes a teacher for us. Now, the downside is that we don't connect. AI doesn't allow us to connect. Connection is our human superpower. And so we have to be very careful that we don't lose that connection. Certainly there are hallucinations. Veracity is really important. So we have to take the time to do that. Interestingly, I have a colleague. He's also been on my podcast. His name's Jeremy Utley. He and a colleague did some research, and they found that you can maximize the productivity with AI when you have a conversation with it as if you were conversing with another human. So I find it highly ironic that the best way to maximize AI is to leverage the thing that makes us unique, which is our ability to communicate. So when people say it's going to ruin our ability to communicate, in fact, it's going to enhance, I think, in
Good
many ways,
quality,
because
a good
that's how we
quality quality.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm
I
with you.
find it
It's
fascinating, and I'm all over the place with my
yeah,
perspective on it.
yeah, yeah. It's funny that I think the using the Google approach of asking it a question is very different. Like that's the original like V1.
Yeah.
The V2s when you're like, if I enter into a conversation with you and have open
Yeah.
dialogue, I get way better answers back.
Well,
It's
let
a
me blow your
bizarre
mind even
experience.
more. Have the output of one LLM communicate to another LLM. Have them have a conversation. So it's now 3 parties, you and 2, and you can get some really interesting discussions going. So I do see value in it. I do think it's right to be concerned and nervous, and I worry about younger children for many reasons with it. I do think, I'm of the age when calculators came out, and the thing that got me, I think calculators are great, but you have to understand what they're doing, right? So you have to understand, and then you use the calculator. And I think AI is the same way. You need to learn how to write, you need to
Yeah,
learn how to communicate, and then use the tool to help.
yeah.
So,
And keep that again, the underlying curiosity. What
yes,
sentence did it take out? It made my paragraph shorter. What like that curiosity turns it from doing an output for you to be a teacher, which is a massive difference, right? Huge,
absolutely.
huge difference.
Absolutely.
Matt, I could chat to you for hours. We haven't got hours. 2 questions. One, if folks listening want to find more of your information other than listening to your podcast, Think Faster, Talk Smarter, or buying the book, which they should do both, how else can people look you up and connect with you?
Thank you. Yes, those are 2 great ways. Think Fast, Talk Smart, and the book, great. But if anybody wants to hear more or learn more, fastersmarter.io. I'm a huge user of LinkedIn. I do a lot of work there. Would love to talk to people, and my whole goal is to help people hone and develop their communication. So
Love
happy
that.
to engage in that way.
Awesome. And then, as you know, we do a $500 donation.
Yes.
Thank you for our guests for their time. Can you talk us about which charity you chose and why?
And I really appreciate that. I think it is so lovely that you do that. There is a charity here in the United States called Vocal Justice. It teaches underrepresented youth how to advocate for themselves, how to leverage communication skills to make a difference, not just in their lives, but in the communities in which they live. The executive director and founder is a colleague, and I find the work that they do so empowering. We need to make sure that the next generation knows how to communicate effectively, and we have to provide them the tools, and Vocal Justice does that quite
That
well.
sounds like an amazing cause. And again, giving those people agency and empowering them to live a better, more effective life is great. So we'll do a donation on your behalf. Matt, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for your time and joining us on Experts Unleashed.
Thank you so much, Dominic. This was a lot of fun, and I so enjoyed the energy you bring to your communication.